Hello friendos and randos, I'm Hero. I've been playing One Piece in Asia since the end of OP01. Today we're talking about and explaining the matchup spreads for the various leaders that are meta in OP03, and I'll be splitting the video in several parts, so make sure to drop a sub to keep updated. Alright, here we go. We have spreadsheet with the numbers as follows, according to the matchups, anywhere from 80-20 to 20-80. And then basically how you read it is the number on the left is the picture on the left, and the number on the right is the picture above, and that's it, right? So obviously the matchups will be 50-50 for all the mirrors, and then I will highlight which is probably like whether you want to go first or second in the mirror as well. And yeah, that's about it. I'll go through to the best of my knowledge, of course, but I do have more knowledge on some leaders than others, and that will probably show as I go through the stats later. So let's hit on with the tier list. Okay, so first up is Teach Zoro. Teach Zoro is a really popular choice towards the end of OP03, the middle and the end of OP03. And the main reason is because of its very good Whitebeard matchup. The Teach himself, of course, hits for 8k at Whitebeard when you use his effect plus the one Dawn on Zoro leader, so that demands 3k counter, which makes it a really strong beater into Whitebeard. So that was the primary strength of the deck. And then other than that, it also just allows you to draw a lot of cards. So if you don't have a way to deal with the Teach, it being of course a 6k body as well, if you don't have a way to deal with the Teach, it creates a lot of value for the Zoro. So we are going to go just left to right and make it easy, and then from there I will be able to just create the overall score, I guess. So Teach Zoro, I think the Teach Zoro matchup in the mirror, you almost definitely want to go second, so you can drop Teach on curve, and then on the first turn you can also drop Dadan or 2 searches so that you can set up for Teach, or you can drop double Izo trying to look for the Teach. So I think in the mirror it's 50-50, and whoever goes second has the slight advantage. And next we have the regular Zoro versus Teach matchup. I actually feel that the regular Zoro is a little bit advantageous against the Teach Zoro. Again, I think you would want to go second so that you can drop the Teach, and that means that this is also because the regular Zoro doesn't really play any other high cost units like the Teach. Everything is just the weenies, so he can rush you down a little bit faster, and that's generally what I see happening. Plus he's able to poke at the Teach a lot. If you're playing this, Zoro is able to poke at the Teach a lot and then force you to burn those resources that you've been gaining from him. And because you're always getting rid of your own bodies with the Teach effect, you don't have anything to clear board on the crackback as well. So all of these I think make the regular Zoro a bit better into Teach. So we're going to put this at about 45-55 for the Teach Zoro. Okay, and then Whitebeard. Whitebeard of course is one of Teach Zoro's best matchups, is what the deck was built to combat. So basically, because the deck was built to battle Whitebeard, of course the matchup is pretty good. But even then, I don't think it is too heavily skewed in the in the Zoro's favor. So I want to say it's about 60-40. The main strengths, as mentioned before, is that the Teach himself, being 4 cost 6k, his 6k body swings into Whitebeard for 7k at minimum, and then 8k if you use the effect. And it also lets you draw with the searches, which regular Zoro would have right now. So basically, yeah, the Teach Zoro matchup into Whitebeard is really good. The Teach forces a lot of counter, 3k at minimum, and then if you do drop the 5 cost marker on the following turn as well, it is a very strong follow-up play. I think the main thing as the Teach Zoro is just you gotta make sure to be careful of the ace on the 7th Dawn turn for the Whitebeard. As long as you play around that, I think generally you're fine. Okay, so that is why I do think the Teach Zoro matchup is still 60-40. If you play it correctly, I think it can even be higher than this, but this is where I would place it for now. I also think it's pretty reliant on going second, so that you can drop the Teach on curve. Okay, next is the Ace matchup. So I think this matchup is actually worse than regular Zoro's matchup for Ace. So the main reason being aces usually run jet pistol as well as Entei, and they even have Jujika, crossfire secret, things like that. So they have a lot of ways to remove that teach and not allow you to generate the value. So if you play scared of those events and you don't play the teach down, the teach stays in hand as a brick, and then that kind of screws you over later as well. So in short, I think 40-60 red Luffy. The red Luffy builds are fairly close to the Whitebeard or Ace builds as well. I think the main build is still the removal focused one. So it's similar to the OP02 type of list. So I would give it a similar rating to Ace, but I think Luffy is a little weaker than Ace in this specific matchup still. Okay, now for Law into Teach Zoro. As a Law player, I felt like Teach Zoro is probably a little easier to deal with than the regular Zoro. The main reason being, if you're able to Otama the Teach, it's actually very easy to remove, and because of that, and them also having less swings, it means that you can keep your hand size up relatively high, because Law is really good with dealing with larger swings because of the number of blockers he has, and not so good with dealing with very wide swings, which regular Zoro is better at. So I feel like the Law into regular Zoro matchup is like 50-50, or maybe even slightly worse because some Zoros run Fire Fist. But the Law into Teach matchup is actually slightly favored for the Law, so I will put it at also around 45-55. Okay, next is Film Kit. Film Kit I think is actually still pretty good, or slightly favorable for Teach Zoro. The main reason being, even if the Teach swarms board, I think Zoro still manages to swarm a little bit faster, and the Nami, like all the units being 5k, still make it easy to chase with them, with, for example, with Buggy or Dadan. Attaching one down allows you to swing into the unit once, and then after that clear with Teach later, and then allow you to draw, so they can't clear your board because you're clearing it yourself, and then you're still generating hand advantage for yourself by drawing a card. So from my perspective, I think this is a slightly favorable matchup for the Teach Zoro, whereas I think the regular Zoro struggle a bit more into Film Kit. So about 55-45 here. Okay, Kinemon. I actually don't have enough experience here to judge fully, but I do think Kinemon would still be slightly favorable into both versions of Zoro still. The main reason being of course the board control with Okiku's, as well as if they play the 5-cost X Drake, it automatically removes this once you swing once, so that's very strong. Other than that, also Oden being able to swing into this is fairly strong as well. The Zoro won't be able to really clear very well. The event wise, they're usually only running Radical Beam, maybe Guard Point, and then after that the Whitebeard Pirate Searcher, so they won't be able to defend this very easily either. I would say maybe even or slightly Kinemon favored for Kinemon into the Teach Zoro. Doflamingo. Zoro is actually one of the worst matchups for Doflamingo in 03, but I think that's specifically for the regular Rush version. The Teach version I think is slightly better, because if they're playing on the slower end, you being able to return that Teach to hand with Soki King or with your 7-cost Doflamingo would make that a little bit weaker. And then other than that, because it's slower, the Doflamingo doesn't have to burn as much resources when you're trying to poke at his rested units. The 4-cost Moria Vanilla also trades into the Teach very well, so that's another thing. So I think if we're looking at Doflamingo specifically, Red Zoro, Rush Zoro a little bit favorable towards the Doflamingo, and Teach Zoro probably 50-50. Okay, Nami. I think both versions of Zoro are fairly good into full-on solitaire Nami. Nami, I think the Teach version is also a little worse into Nami compared to the regular Rush version, but both of them are actually not super favorable for the Zoros. The main reason being, for the Namis, if you are able to keep your Zefs on board, for example, you're able to reduce the pressure a lot by removing the Rush Zoros or their searchers, so they can't use the effect, or you're able to just reuse your Kaya several times, and because they're swinging taller rather than wider when it comes to the teach. It does make it so that you can defend it easier with like one event. So I want to say Nami probably maybe 50-50 for the regular Zoro, and then about 45-55 for teach Zoro. I feel like we should be doing these both at the same time because it's easier to talk about it that way. So I'm gonna put the Zoro matchups in as well. 1 second. Let's see. So if this is 45 and this is 55, then I think Whitebeard is about 50-50. Ace is about 50-50. Actually, Ace is about 45-55. And then Luffy is probably the same. It might be worse depending on the take rate Robin. But I'll talk about this in detail later as well. Okay, Magellan. Magellan is one of Magellan's worst matchups is probably the regular Rush Zoro. And the reason I think Teach Zoro is actually slightly worse, of course, is because the Teach is in range of the 6-cost king. So 4-cost unit, if you play down the king on the 6 non-turn, you are able to get rid of that after it's only swung once. So good value for the Magellan player. Of course, Magellan's 5-cost Magellan doesn't do super much in this matchup because Zoro does still have a lot of low to the ground units. But I think it's still pretty negative for the Magellan player. I would say it's about 55-45 for the Zoro, for the Teach Zoro into the Magellan. And then I think Rush Zoro is about 60-40 into it. Similarly with Black, I think the Teach Zoro is slightly worse. But I do think it's still slightly favorable. I will give it probably the same rating. Rush Zoro slightly better into the Teach Zoro. Rush Zoro slightly better than Teach Zoro into the Smoker matchup. Okay, Lucci I think is similar to this. But Lucci actually doesn't have as easy of a time getting rid of the Teach compared to Smoker, because if you're running just Edo and Kaku, you won't be able to hit 4-cost units very easily. I think it's probably like that instead. It's just slightly better for Zoro into Edo Lucci. I think it's a very tough matchup for Lucci when it comes to tackling Zoro. Okay, next we have a Black Yellow Mum. I want to say that the matchup is slightly unfavored for Rush Zoro as well as for Teach Zoro. I would say it's something like this. I think in general one of Zoro's worst matchups in O3 is the yellow, because they are able to try and stall out as well as outvalue you with just larger units. And particularly I think Yamato is quite bad for Zoro as well. Especially the Rush variant. So I'm going to rate all 3 of these leaders, and I think the rate is probably 45-55 for both of these into the Teach Zoro. The Teach Zoro does a little better than Rush Zoro, mainly because of the larger unit and the more value generation. If the yellow player does get a lucky Raite trigger off, though, it is very tough for you. But again, that is very dependent on whether they do hit that trigger. And then for regular Zoro, I think yellow is about 40-60 instead, like that. Also, I realized that this got moved down and whole row, so okay. And now we're going to talk about the Yamato matchup. So I think Teach Zoro actually does fairly well into Yamato. Main reason being they don't have that 10-cost Big Mom. The main things that you'll see is just the 7-cost and the 8-cost Big Mom and Katakuri. So 8k is the maximum figure, and that Teach is able to trade into that as well easily. Of course, swinging into face, similarly, Yamato does have that 6k base power leader, same as Whitebeard. But similarly, because you have such a big body, it does make that matchup a little bit easier. So I'm going to put this at about 45-55, same as the other yellow matchups. It is slightly better than the other two, but I do think it's still slightly against the Zoro in terms of like who's favored here. And then next we do have Rush Zoro into Yamato. I think it's probably one of the worst matchups. So my opinion, 35-65 to the Yamato. That 6k body is actually very annoying, especially when they aren't taking their life every turn. So they do have that they can just stall you out, and then they'll play 7 cost Big Mom to force you to trash your own life, and then either that or to give them a life. All of that makes the matchup for Yamato very tough, especially needing to continuously slam 6k into face. Okay, looking at the Rush Zoro versions matchups, so I think we covered, it is slightly positive for the Rush Zoro into the Teach Zoro. And again, this is because of the tempo. Rush Zoro is just able to generate more swings and more quickly. Next is the Whitebeard matchup. I think Whitebeard is a little tougher for the regular Zoro. You are able to continuously poke face for 6k every turn, but you do need to invest a lot of Dawn to do that. And if you are able to drop that 5 cost Mako, it is a little bit of an easier matchup because you will have that 7k swing every turn more easily, and that does make the matchup easier. But I think it's still not as favorable as compared to the Teach version. Next is Ace. So for Ace, I think Ace is the matchup is very dependent on who draws more of the 5 cost Mako, I think. And then from there, it's just a matter of like trying to play better and get your opponent's resources low, and then from there finishing quickly. So I think this goes for both sides. For the Luffy variant that runs like Robin and stuff, I think Zoro is still slightly weaker, depending on if they are able to keep that Robin on board and stick it. But Zoro also has the potential to rush out the Luffy faster, because this Luffy build does run the more bricks as well. If they are running the 9 cost Whitebeard instead of the Shanks, it might also be a little bit tougher due to that 7k body on defense and then eating the 10k swing every turn, since this Zoro build doesn't run any blockers, whereas the Teach Zoro does run the 4 cost Mako. But either way, I think it's fairly similar in terms of the matchup spread. So Rush Zoro version, depending on whether or not they run Fire Fist, which most of them didn't by the end of the set, I think it's about even with Law. It's really a skill-based matchup depending on how well you play into reducing his resources, playing around the 5 cost Makos, etc, etc. And if you do include Fire Fist in your deck, I think this goes up from 50-50 to about 55-45 for the Zoro, maybe even 60-40. But the Fire Fist is of course only good in certain matchups and is a very expensive event to use, so that's something to consider as well. Film Kit, I think, is fairly even into Zoro, or maybe even slightly positive on the Film Kit's end. The Film Kit is able to flood the board in order to manage your board as well. He's able to cascade down the Brook into Nami, and then from there he's able to Luffy into Brook into Nami again. So it's a very, very wide kind of board, which is quite tough for you to deal with, especially because nowadays the Zoros don't run Jet Pistol as well. This version is the one running Fiery Door as well as the Diablo Jambe as well, so that won't be able to do much against the Film Kit. If you're not able to get them to 0, you won't be able to use the Diablo Jambe very effectively either. Okay, similarly Kinemon, I think it's the same as OP02. The Zoro does have more tools, but I do think it's still slightly unfavored because the Kinemon will be able to clear your board using his Yamatos as well as his Okikus and such. And then the Oden will be able to chase your 5 cost Mako to reduce your hand size significantly by swinging at it twice every turn. Okay, Doflamingo wise, Zoro is slightly favored into this. Doflamingo has a bit of trouble dealing with wider boards, especially if you're swinging into his board and he can't defend it too well. Because of the fact that all his units come in rested, you're always able to force him to burn hand cards to protect them or to just lose the unit. And that's something that of course makes the player's time a bit rough as well. Okay, Nami I think is 50-50. This is mainly because if the Nami is able to starve you of your resources by bouncing the Rush Zoros with the Zeph, they are able to clear your small units with the leader swing every turn. They never swing your face, so you never draw the extra hand cards from your you never draw the extra cards from life. Eventually you will run out of resources, and that will definitely allow them to get an easy Zeph swing into your face to mill 7. And all of this is while they're already playing their game plan and milling with their Kayas and whatever not. So I would say it's pretty even, but it may be Nami advantaged as well. but the teach version is definitely more disadvantaged. Okay. I think I mentioned again, Magellan and Smoker and Luffy, all fairly bad matchups for the black or purple players. So all of these decks kind of suffer from being a bit slow and being unable to deal with the white kind of boards, and that's why the Rush Zoro is still very strong into them. And then we have the yellow decks. I think yellow is probably Zoro's one of Zoro's worst matchups still. On second thought, I think Black Mom might be closer to 50-50 instead of unfavored, mainly because she is also a fairly slow deck, and the healing does require 4 Dawn total in order to play to stall. But this deck does also run a lot of blockers, so if you do run that Diablo Jambe, you are able to just bypass all of that as well. And then as mentioned, I think all the 3 yellow decks are pretty bad matchups in general for the Rush version Zoro. They are able to kind of just stall you out and then win just by having more resources than you, especially with that 10 cost Big Mom near the end of the game. Dropping multiples of those is still pretty rough for the Zoro. And that's it for both versions of Zoro for now. I think overall I would say Teach version Zoro is probably maybe A+ tier, and then the Rush Zoro is probably S tier still for OP03. The matchup spread is still very good, being able to do well into Whitebeard as well as Ace. And then everything is still relatively positive, and then only negative into yellow in general. Even this matchup is still pretty winnable. It really depends on the yellow player. But I think if you are playing two, like the best Zoro player and the best yellow player, I think the yellow player still will come out on top. Okay, next we're going to discuss Whitebeard. So what we'll do is we'll just put the matchup numbers here just to match first. Teach Zoro and then Zoro. Okay, so now we'll talk about the other matchups. Okay, so Ace, right? So my opinion on the Ace into Whitebeard matchup is that it's actually fairly even. Depending on how the curve goes out. I think if Ace is going second, it makes it slightly advantaged for the Ace. So I'm saying this as a Ace from the perspective of an Ace player. I think it's slightly advantage to Ace if you do manage to get to go second against the Whitebeard. That extra Dawn allows you to burn a hand card every turn while still playing on curve, so that's a pretty big deal as well. The main issue is of course just not having a 3 Dawn or 4 Dawn play for Ace right now, only 4 cost Mako being the exception. But I think being able to remove the units that the Whitebeard plays on curve is still very important. And if you don't have the removal in hand, being able to play 5 cost Mako into 7 cost Ace into 9 cost Whitebeard is still a very strong line of play into the Whitebeard as well. I want to say it's 50-50, but maybe depending on skill it could be 55 for the Whitebeard. I think Mono Red Luffy is actually one of the builds that is very strong into Whitebeard because of the fact that he does have that leader effect that allows you to swing 6 every turn, and some of the builds also run the Shanks, which is a very big unit and will do a lot of damage for the Whitebeard. Combined with the Gordon as well, and that Shanks can swing for 20k unblockable, for the 4 cost Mako will be at 2k or lower. So from my opinion, I think that the Luffy can be not so positive matchup for the Whitebeard. About 45-55 sounds about fair. Slightly advantage to the Luffy. Now for Law, I want to say that the matchup is 50-50 skill based, but I think in reality it is probably slightly favored towards the Whitebeard. Slightly favored towards the Whitebeard mainly because if you do drop consecutive Whitebeards, it is very difficult for the Law to deal with it. The main reason being the 8k base power is very, very tough for Law to kind of overcome. He does need to attach 2 Dawn to any of his units at minimum in order to hit that line, and that kind of investment is very difficult for Law to manage. Other than that, the Whitebeard when attacking effect does get rid of your blockers as well, so that kind of prevents you from playing just walling up behind blockers and hiding, and forces you sometimes to block with your blocker laws even, which is very unoptimal as well. Another thing I will note is that if you are good at law and you do know the matchup well, you know it inside out, you are able to play around all of these shortcomings. So I think at a higher level, it might go down to about 50-50. But I think in like if you're looking at just the baseline of like Whitebeard versus law in general, I think Whitebeard is slightly advantaged here. Okay, now I want to talk about the film kit build. I think the film kit build that Aogami no Teru uses, the one that was very popularized and eventually I think copied a lot in the West, was very strong, specifically into Whitebeard. And the main reason for this is because of the fact that the way he plays it into Whitebeard specifically denies the 2 life 9 cost Whitebeard, which is what a lot of the O3 Whitebeards were trying to achieve at that time. And it also means that the amount of swings being very high and very large, as well as having that 7 cost Luffy plus Paradise Waterfall restand combo, makes it such that it's very tough to get damage down onto the kit. So all of these factors kind of make it tough for the Whitebeard to really stand a fighting chance, I think. So I wouldn't say it's about 40-60 for Whitebeard into the kit. Kinemon is a favorable matchup for Whitebeard. And the main reason for this is because Kinemons run a lot of no counter cards, and the no counter cards are pretty tough, I think, for them, especially when Whitebeard is swinging 6k at you every turn. If you don't have any 2ks, if you don't have any counters in general, you won't be able to protect yourself from those attacks. Other than that, because they are fairly reliant on having that Oden in order to hit you harder, so they actually may want to choose to go first. I think if the Kinemon does go first and get that Oden down on 7th Dawn, then they are in a little bit more of an advantageous position. But other than that, I think it's slightly advantage to Whitebeard here. Okay, Doflamingo is known to be the Whitebeard killer among the new decks, both Doflamingo and Lucci as well. I think they are mainly built in order to kill Whitebeard, basically. And the main reason for that is because, for one, Doflamingo has that 7k swing every turn while still being able to build board. So he'll be able to play a 4-cost vanilla, he'll be able to play maybe a 1-cost blocker. 1-cost blocker on top of that, he'll be able to swing 7. Then next turn, he'll be able to swing with the vanilla, he'll be able to swing with his face. If he's running Brick Fist, he removes your Atmos. If he's running the 3000 Worlds, he removes your 5-cost Mako. Then when you play the Tetch, he drops the Mihawk or the Soke King, and then it's just curtains for the Whitebeard. You're unable to build your board at all. The tempo is completely in the Doflamingo's favor. It's pretty much over for you. So I think this is probably one of the worst matchups along with Lucci. But even with Whitebeard's worst matchups, I think it is still fairly playable because of the sheer consistency of the deck compared to every other deck. I think Doflamingo, to beat Whitebeard, you still need to draw all those powerful pieces, you still need to get lucky, you still need to have that Perona into stacking your hand perfectly and such. But Whitebeard just has a much simpler game plan as well. I will put this at 40-60, but I will admit that it is still definitely winnable for the Whitebeard. Okay, Nami. Nami is a very favorable matchup for Whitebeard in general. Whitebeard does have the very tall swings. One of the annoying things I was facing when I was playing against Whitebeard as Nami when I was testing it is some of them would not play characters at all to just not get their characters bounced, and then what they would do is simply swing at my face with as maximum Dawn possible each turn, and then drop consecutive Whitebeards, and I couldn't do anything about it. So I think that was one of the frustrating types of plays for Nami, and at that point I think it's pretty tough for the Nami to come back as well and defend. So for now, 60-40 to the Whitebeard, I think it's a very positive matchup on this side. So Magellan is actually another what I would call Whitebeard killer. So out of these three, I think all of them are kind of built to kill Whitebeard in general, including Doflamingo as well. So these four, not including the Nami, I guess. So as a Whitebeard killer, the main reason is because every turn after the 3 Dawn turn, you are able to swing for 6k with your leader plus one of your bodies, and that makes it quite a tough tough ask for Whitebeard to keep dropping cards. And if you drop the 5-cost Magellan, you are able to delay that 9-cost Whitebeard by 1 turn, and then that guarantees that they won't be able to do it at 2 life. And sometimes they won't even be able to do it at 1 life if you drop multiple of the Magellan. Not only that, if you do play the 4-cost Vanilla or whatever, the 6-cost King is able to take that out very easily, as well as the 9-cost Kaido will be able to remove your Attach. He will be able to remove your 5-cost Marco as well, forcing you to burn an event. All of these things do make it a fairly good matchup for the Magellan here. I want to say it's about 45-55 or maybe even 40-60 into Magellan as Whitebeard. Let me give it a think. Yeah, I think even 40-60 is fair, honestly. Okay, now I'm going to give a similar score for both Smoker and Lucci, but I think Lucci is actually better than Smoker and Magellan in this sense. I would want to say it's 35-55, but actually on second thought it doesn't feel that skewed towards the Lucci. So slightly better than Smoker and Magellan, but I think it's still about 40-60. Okay, next is all the yellow decks, and I think the consensus is that yellow in general is pretty easy for Whitebeard. I think the black portion of the Black Yellow Mom does make it a fairly positive, slightly more positive matchup for the Black Yellow Mom, but it's still fairly difficult for you to deal with the large bodies of the Whitebeard. I think if the Whitebeard only plays down, for example, the 5-cost Marco, it does make it difficult for black decks in general to kind of generate value. I think Smoker is probably the best at denying tempo because of the fact that he totally denies Thatch as a character, because leader effect plus Sakazuki does get rid of it. So that is one huge plus for Smoker over Lucci in that matchup. But Lucci's leader ability allowing you to completely neg Blocker Marco is even more valuable in that sense as well. But yeah, as I was saying, I think the Big Mom matchup is probably the toughest out of the 4 here. But it will be it's still better advantageous to the Whitebeard, so we're going to put it at 55-45. And then for the 3 yellow decks here, right, all of them I think are very favorable towards Whitebeard. It's very tough for these decks to deal with the Whitebeard, mainly because their biggest value tool, which is the 10-cost Big Mom, is rendered pretty much worthless. It's not worthless in the sense that it's like totally unplayable, but it's a lot less value when you're using 10-cost Big Mom on a 0 life opponent, and that is why for one, I think all of these leaders do suffer. For Yamato, of course, the 7-cost Big Mom, not the 10-cost. But yeah, I think the matchup is actually very, very skewed towards the Whitebeard. I want to say it's 70-30 for both of these. And I'm going to make an exception for Big Mom because of the fact that she can use that leader ability to rig her life, right? And the main use case you will use for this is number 1, Raite, in order to remove things like the 4-cost Marco on the crackback, or to reduce the number of attackers that they have, or to just reduce KO the Atmos on curve. And the second usage is, of course, putting things like Blocker Brule or Ikoku, and allowing you to store additional turns by adding life back to your life pile, and then also getting rid of the bricks in your hand, which is another issue that yellow tends to face, which is too many no counter cards. So yellow Big Mom actually has an easier time into Whitebeard, but I do still think it is still favorable for the Whitebeard. 60-40 for the yellow Mom, and then 70-30 for the other 2 mono yellow leaders. Overall, Whitebeard does have a lot of quite a few negative matchups, but he does do very well into all of the meta decks. I actually want to say his Rush Zoro matchup might be 55-45 instead of 50-50. Might be slightly positive actually. So looking at it like that, he does have a few negative matchups, but most of these are decks that are literally designed to beat Whitebeard, and he does very well into most of the meta decks as well as all of yellow. So right now you can tell why Whitebeard is definitely is still shaping the OP03 meta. He is the best deck in format, still does the most results at tournaments as well. So yeah, Whitebeard definitely still S+, still definitely at the top of the table. We're looking at Ace now. Ace wise, we'll copy the first 3. Let's see, like that means like that, and then like that. Okay, so Ace's matchups into Teach Zoro, regular Zoro, and Whitebeard, I think as mentioned, Ace is actually favorable into the Teach Zoro, a little favorable into normal Zoro, and then 50-50 into Whitebeard, in my opinion. So these all make him a very strong leader into. I think he's the strongest of the red leaders when you're looking at only the red mirrors. Okay, next we have the Luffy here. So I think Luffy is actually again a 50-50 for the Ace. The main reason being he does have a lot of rush units as well. When it comes to Ace, he does struggle if he isn't able to remove your board. So if you go wider, it does make it a bit tough. Wider and larger. So things like multiple rush Zoros, Zoro plus rush Luffy, things like that. That kind of curve would make it difficult for Ace to deal with your stuff. Especially if you're going first, you have rush Zoro and rush Luffy, and the Ace can't drop the Ace to respond yet. It's a very tough time for the Ace. I want to say it's still definitely winnable. Maybe 50-50, maybe 45-55 in the Luffy's favor. So you can see Luffy actually has a pretty good matchup spread in general. He's like 55-45 into everything so far. Okay, Ace into Law. One of Ace's best matchups is the Law. I think it is definitely about 60-40 to maybe even 65-35. Being able to constantly remove the Law's board does make it very difficult for Law to do his usual shambles shenanigans. He won't be able to get 5 units on the board to use his leader effect. Makes it very difficult in general for him to just gain value. A good Law player will definitely be able to play around this, so maybe probably will leave this at 60-40, but it is one of his most favorable matchups. I think for now 65-35 is probably fair still. Okay, Film Kit, right? Film Kit, I think into Ace is very dependent on whether or not he draws the Brook Nami combo. The main, again, like I said, the main thing that Ace struggles with is very, very wide and tall boards. So the Rush Luffy, like I mentioned with the Luffy thing, if you have Zoro plus Rush Luffy, and then later you drop Shanks, it's kind of tough for you to deal with all of them at once. And similarly for Kid, if you're able to drop Brook into Nami, and then the following turn you drop Brook into Nami again, it's actually very, very tough for the Ace to deal with. Especially because you're able to do this multiple times in a row. The following turn, so for Kid, the ideal line of play against Ace would be Brook into Nami, then Brook into Nami, and then Luffy into Brook or something like that. And that would be very, very tough for the Ace to deal with all of the units at once. Even with Fire Fist, it's still burning a 3-card combo because you do have to use Otama to reduce one of the power. So all things considered, I want to say this is probably either 50-50 or 45-55 with the Kid being slightly favored here. So you can see why this Kid deck was also built, right? Because the matchup so far into the 3 best meta decks are all slightly positive. I'm only giving us only a slight negative to Teach Zoro in general, and everything else is quite positive, which is why Kid was taken as the anti-meta deck to defeat all the red decks here. Now, I think the Kinemon matchup is actually fairly favored towards the Ace player, because Kinemon is one of those decks that runs a little bit slower. They only play usually 1 unit per turn, and then usually that unit is 5k, a 6k, or maybe an 8k, and all of these numbers are hittable with Ace's events. So that makes it such that there's not enough pressure to deal with Ace's bodies as well. You're not able to chase that 5-cost Mako, force the Ace to burn events or anything like that either, because there's no removal or anything like that. So you can see slight difference in the 2 green leaders. Generally they are weak and strong as different things. So Ace slightly favored into Kinemon. Now Doflamingo. So Doflamingo is again very good into Ace. The main reason for this is number 1, being able to continuously pressure 7k is still fairly painful, and number 2, the Ace's main body that he'll put on board, 4-cost Mako, 5-cost Mako, 7-cost Ace, and Whitebeard. And of those 4, Doflamingo has the answer to 3 of them in 3000 Worlds, as well as 7-cost Doflamingo and Mihawk. So he's able to remove 3 of those very efficiently, and all of these make it a fairly tough time for Ace if the Doflamingo has the nuts, as you say. The one thing about Doflamingo is that the 3-cost Doflamingo is a very good target for Fire Fist. So 3-cost Doflamingo and one of their other 4-cost units that they play from their leader effect is a very good target for Fire Fist. But just a thing to note that the removal for Doflamingo is very, very efficient when it comes to tackling Ace. 40-60 I think in terms of the matchup. Now another thing is Nami. So Nami is also pretty bad for Ace. The main reason because again, Ace, if you're running only radical beams, it's actually fairly tough to deal with Nami because you won't be able to, one, replenish life, and number two, your life won't be low enough to get Radical's beams additional 2k counter. So it's basically just a 2k counter in hand for one Dawn, making it a very inefficient card. And they are able to kind of do their own thing because as Ace, you do play a bit of a slower game. You only play one unit on the board per round, usually, per turn. And then that makes it such that the Nami can, for example, if you play just the 5-cost Marco, they can return it with no Chico. Some of them do run 3000 words. You can return it to the bottom of your deck, and then they don't have to spend too much Dawn defending because you're spending all of your Dawn playing things on curve instead. I want to say slightly favored towards the Nami. Magellan. Okay, from my experience with the Magellan matchup, I think it's actually still fairly favorable towards the Ace. As long as you know when you're supposed to be clearing the Magellan and when you can use your Ace correctly, it is quite favorable. The main reason, of course, is because Magellan doesn't have any removal for 5-cost units, so when you drop your 5-cost Marco, they don't really have an answer. They just have to eat that 6k swing every turn. I want to say it's fairly favorable, but not too favorable, so 55-45 seems about accurate. Now, both Smoker and Lucci, I think, are also fairly good matchups for Ace. The main reason being, in this specific matchup, I think consecutive Aces is very, very tough to deal with. The Ace is a very strong card when it comes to clearing board, and when Black doesn't really have a board, they don't really have a way to just deal any damage. They are able to remove your things on curve off tempo, but at the same time, because you're running the 5-cost Marco, it's very easy to just revive it, return it from the trash as rested. And if they are removing 5-cost Marco on curve, for example, on 6 Dawn, they won't have an additional 1 Dawn to swing into the 5-cost Marco, so they'll just swing your face, right? So all of this make it such that the matchup is actually pretty tough for the Smoker as well as the Lucci. I think it's probably 60-40 in favor of the Ace here. Similarly for Lucci as well, I think it's slightly favored. Okay, next is the yellow section. So this section is probably Ace's worst time. So I want to say the matchup spread is actually fairly similar to Zoro's one, with the exception of Yamato. I think is actually slightly favored towards the Ace instead. So the main reason for this is because Yamato doesn't have that 10-cost Big Mom. So not having the 10-cost Big Mom is actually a very big deal, because all of Yamato's units are within 8k or less power, and then that means that the Flame Emperor hits all of them almost like for free, right? You don't have to Otama, you don't have to reduce their power in any way, you can just hit them with Flame Emperor. The 6k power is a bit of an issue, because the leader of course doesn't have a, like, if you're playing on curve, you won't really have spare Dawn to hit leader with 6, but you can use the Ace SR of course to make it such that your Ace character can hit board, and then that problem is kind of solved already. So I think that matchup is a fair bit easier than Yellow Mom as well as Katakuri. So Black Mom wise, I think Black Yellow Mom is a bit easier than the other two yellow decks, mainly because of the black side of Black Yellow Mom is a little easier for Ace to deal with. I think it's similar to the rest of the black decks where you just kind of just Ace repeatedly and they have trouble to deal with that. And as well, because 5-cost Marco again is not removable easily in Ace, it's pretty much unkillable. It's tough for them to kind of generate value against you. The main removal they'll be using for you, of course, I think is the 8-cost Katakuri, and even then if they heal you, I think it's a benefit as well. And if they remove the 5-cost Marco, they are still taking damage from the 7-cost Ace every turn, so that's another thing. So all of these make it such that I think the black-yellow Big Mom matchup is slightly easier than the mono-yellow leaders instead. But because she does still have access to that 10-cost Big Mom, it is still a tough matchup. Similarly, I think Katakuri and Big Mom are both about even in terms of Ace's issue. One thing to note with the with the mono-yellow Big Mom is that if they do rig the Thunderbolt Raite into their life and you do drop 7-cost Ace, if they do hit Thunderbolt on your 5 cost macro, you are able to reuse that effect. So for example, if the 4 cost, if they have a 4 cost vanilla or they have the cracker on board, and you use your ace to reduce its power by 3, if you sync leader with the 5 cost macro, and they thunderbolt the 5 cost macro and you replay it, you are able to KO that cracker for free using the 5 cost macro effect. So that's something that you can take note of in order to kind of make them hesitate to use that thunderbolt trigger. Okay, so yeah, that is the matchup spread for ace. I think looking at it, you can look at the top 4 decks in the format now, all the red decks, and then you kind of see that all of them generally have good matchups and bad matchups, but the matchup spreads are slightly different for all of them. For example, the Zoro does a little worse into the other red leaders, but is better into the things that kill the other red leaders. So for example, Zoro is very good into the Whitebeard and Ace killers, Doflamingo and Magellan, Smoker and Lucci, and is not very good into the things that get killed by Whitebeard, but he does similarly compared to Ace as well. Then in this case for Whitebeard, he does very well into pretty much all the meta leaders is pretty much even matchups, and then he has a good matchup into Law, which is also popular, and then he also does very well into all of yellow, so that's also very good for Whitebeard. And then for Ace, you see he has good matchups into all of the red leaders, is either good or even, and then he even has a very good matchup into the Law, but then he trades that off for a slightly worse matchup into into Kid, Doflamingo and Nami compared to everyone else. Next, we're going to talk about Mono Red Luffy. Mono Red Luffy is actually a very, very strong leader. Now, the reason for this, of course, is that leader effect giving you very efficient Dawn usage. I think because of the type of builds he runs as well with the Robin and the Shanks, and some of them even run the 9 cost Whitebeard as well. It gives you a lot of removal potential. And the event focus builds that run Fire Fist also make it very strong when it comes to getting rid of things on the board. So I want to put it at also about 55-45 into Law. I think it's having removal like that is efficient in general is very strong. And then being able to deny Law that tempo is a big deal when it comes to countering him. Okay, next we have the Film Kit. I think Film Kit, it depends. I think it really depends on whether the Luffy is able to draw Otamas and Robins and Gordons. And if so, then he'll be able to remove the stuff easily, and if not, then not so much. I would say it's about 50-50 as well. So Luffy is the most like 50-50 kind of leader in general when it comes to the red leaders. I think he has the most even matchup spread in general, but I think he also suffers from fighting yellow. I think his matchup there is pretty tough. Okay, next is Kinemon. I think Kinemon, similar to Zoro, I think he has a slight advantage when it comes to removing the threats on board. The Kinemon list also sometimes run X-Drake or Creek even, so removing multiple Rush Zoros, for example, or a Zoro and a Robin is fairly good for the Kinemon. I want to say it's slightly favoured for the Kinemon. Dolphy. I think Dolphy, I don't have enough experience with this matchup in particular, from Luffy into Doflamingo. I want to say it's about the same as Zoro, where it should be slightly, it should be either slightly favoured or it should be the same as Teach Zoro, where it's slightly, where it's about even. So I'm going to put it as even here. Okay, Nami. Nami wise, I'm going to put it also the same as Zoro. I think it is fairly dependent on whether the Nami is playing more bouncing units or not. But the Zeph hitting both Robin as well as Zoro is a big deal, I think, with trying to reduce the amount of removal that the Luffy has. And if the Luffy is playing a primarily removal focus build, the Nami doesn't have enough things that is worth removing for you to be spending all that Dawn on it instead of attacking. Magellan. I think Magellan into Luffy would actually be about I know it's kind of a meme, but it's also about even. I think the Magellan itself denying the 1 Dawn isn't super important, but the 6 cost King and the 5 cost Queen are pretty good units in order to have that extra beater, as well as to have more counter. And now that Magellan has their 3 cost Mino Rhino, that allows them to have a beater that the Luffy doesn't really want to clear unless you want to give your opponent hand advantage. I want to say it's still 50-50 for the Luffy here. Now, Smoker and Lucci, I think for these two, the Smoker matchup for red is slightly worse than Lucci. The main reason being because for Air Door Lucci, the amount of tempo that you get from being able to Air Door out a unit, a 7k power unit or a 6k power unit one turn early, or by playing the 4-cost vanilla is still fairly high. So all of those make it easier compared to with Smoker, where on 4 down you're only playing like Borsalino or Kuzan, both of which are only 5k. You don't have enough pressure as well to deal with it. I want to say it's slightly favoured to Luffy for Smoker, and then it should be maybe about even. If not, it should be something like this. Okay, all the yellow leaders. So I think Luffy has the same problems as Ace when it comes to the yellow leaders. It should probably be negative all around. So I'm thinking something like this, maybe like this. So the yellow leaders, I think, just outvalue Luffy when it comes to the big units. It's tough for Luffy to match up with yellow, especially if they hit a few trigger units or even the Thunderbolt early, and then that reduces your tempo significantly. Even if you are able to get the Shanks down on curve, I think it's easy enough to deal with the earlier swings, such that when you drop the Katakuris or you drop the 10-cost mums, you're in a good position and you're able to just get rid of whatever the Luffy plays in response. I think Luffy is still a very strong leader, but I don't think he makes it into the S tier yet. Actually, looking at the matchup spreads, it does look like he's he's very, very strong, right? But specifically, I think the yellow matchups and these matchups not being super favorable do take away from the leader itself. Plus, looking at the matchup spreads I've given him, it actually does make it look like he's the best red leader. Let me think about it again. I think Ace might actually be 45-55 for the Luffy. Maybe like this. And then Kid might also be 45-55. Yeah, okay. I think this makes a bit more sense. Because I don't think he is that good, but he is very good of a leader choice still. A+. If you've made it this far into the video, I just wanted to thank you for watching all the way. If you have any questions or clarifications about the things that I've said, make sure to leave a comment and I'll do my best to respond. Alternatively, you can tweet at me, a link should be in the description, and make sure to follow me there as well as on Twitch, and to subscribe to this channel so you can be up to date with any other content I put out. Thank you very much again, and I'll see you next time.